Shiraz, I see people are still coming in. Wonder if we'll give them one more minute. Okay. Okay.
So maybe we should start just for everyone who was here on time, and people can join us as we start. What do you say, guys? Riel, Yaron, you're good to go?
I see people are still joining, but I think we should start respecting people who came on time for sure.
Right. Okay, so guys, I'm hoping that the sound won't haunt you at night of the ding dongs, but we'll probably keep going for a few more minutes, but we're going to start anyway. So first of all, hi everyone, good evening. Thank you for joining us. And I see some familiar faces and some names from our previous webinar that we had back in August. And so welcome for those of you returning, and welcome newbies joining us for the first time today. This is our second webinar, the second part of the Sales Enablement Program, dealing with Practice Makes Perfect. Today is about sales simulations. You probably saw the promos and all our invites. And before we start and deep dive into the agenda, I just want to link it to our first part. Hi, everyone joining us. We just started. A quick link to our previous webinar for those of you who need a quick refreshment, or for those of you joining us today and just want a recap. So our previous webinar was more strategic, more planning mode, and it basically introduced our sales enablement program. We started out by mapping 4 paradigm shifts in the evolution of sales post digital revolution, and how to use all of them to create a holistic approach to sales. Then we dove into 5 focus area of the sales enablement program, from recruiting the right professionals, and everything basically led up to everybody sells. And today we're going to land this airplane. We're going to move from the strategic planning mode into the ground. Super practical. We're going to share all our cards, and we're going to go back to basics, because the way we see it, simulations cross all 5 of these focus areas. And we're going to go simulations 101, how to do it right, back to basics. And it's especially critical in today's COVID-19 reality. I just want to share a few discussions that we had right after our previous webinar. We started thinking, so what are we going to do next? What's the next webinar going to be about? And we said, are we going to do sales again? We just did that in August, and we have so many contents that we've developed around the human-to-human dynamic in the business world, in the organizational landscape, especially with everything going on today. And we kind of went back and forth about that. But then we felt like the tribe has spoken and the market has spoken, and we just had to genuinely listen to our customers. And we realized that sales are the backbone of every business, and it's in trouble right now. It's tough out there, and we have to meet our deadlines, our quotas, our targets, and you have to do it remotely. And you want to keep relationships tight with your customers. You want to keep on having your team engaged. And how do you do that when things are so intense? And we just realized that's the pain point. That's like the beating need. And that's why we came up with our webinar today. So hopefully you'll find it as beneficial as we did. And we want to teach you some tools, basically speak to you guys and also hear you out. So we dedicated a 30-minute segment at the end of the webinar, at the end of the hour, to hear you. So if you have any comments, you want to challenge something, you want to ask us, write your comments as the webinar goes along. If there's a burning question, then feel free to chat away and we'll do our best to address it. Basically, in today's session, we're going to cover a few things. We're going to start by looking at the most common mistake companies make in their approach to simulation programs. Then we'll look at a list of strategic benefits of successful simulation programs beyond just upskilling the salespeople themselves. We'll introduce 4 recommended building blocks of any simulation program, and then share the components that we include in every simulation kit. And finally, we're going to close up by showing you, just sharing our cards and showing you how to build these programs in a truly data-driven way. I want to introduce my dear friends and colleagues who have sat so nicely up. If you knew how rare it is for them to be quiet for this 2 whole minutes, honestly, you would just be in awe.
Don't press your luck.
See, it didn't
Don't
last
press
too
your
long,
luck.
right? So we have Yaron Zuckerman, who's a senior consultant at Vayomar. And we also have
Everybody,
co-founder and author, and myself, Shiraz, senior consultant. We all have vast experience around the globe with a strong focus on sales operations in the past 2 years. And again, we're here to speak to you guys and just share our best practices and hear your best practices as well at the end of the 30 minutes. And I want to start by asking Yaron, let's start with you. You get to speak first. Why is it that when we say the S word, when we say simulations, people cringe? They either think it's fake, or maybe they don't understand the impact, or they just think they can wing it. So what's the big X factor about or the misconception about simulations? Why did we get such diverse comments?
it's a good question, and I think it all starts with the actual planning. The root cause, I believe, is the fact that people tend to look at simulation as, like you said, something simple, something basic that just role play, and they don't really get to think and actually plan what is the desired outcome I want to get out of a certain simulation or out of a simulation program. Because you can simulate a scenario that is meant to drive a specific learning. Like we learned a new tool, we want to implement that, we want to use it, we build a simulation for that. Or it can be, we actually want to run a diagnostic simulation, kind of see what's going on and see, can we find any holes or anything, and then go back with a plan. So when you don't actually put in place a desired outcome that you want to, plan for, the actual scenarios people tend to build and the actual role plays tend to be very, very slim. It's just go into the room, you'll be the seller, you'll be the buyer, let's just role play, here's the situation. You know that scene from the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, right? You're selling pens, right? You're a pen salesman, sell me the pen. And when that happens, the people doing the role play, they just don't have enough to go on. They can't really drive a conversation, a real sales scenario over that. So the scenario usually just falls flat. And then when it's over and everybody else is looking, and now you want to analyze what happened, what did we learn? Now you don't have a North Star, you don't have a desired outcome out of the simulation that you can analyze. Did we come close? Did we get there? So it all boils down to, okay, so let's talk about what didn't go well. So it turns into a grilling session of the person who actually role played. You did this wrong, and I didn't like this, and I think this was bad. And when you go through that experience, the person sitting there obviously does not want to role play ever. And also the people who was watching kind of thinking, I really hope this is the last time we're doing this and I'm not going to be next in the hot seat because this is not fun and doesn't go anywhere. So when that happens, that's a problem. So it starts out with the planning. And then when you have, your goal in sight, you can actually go and construct a simulation. And from our experience, what we actually discovered is it takes up to like 20 hours to really build one simulation scenario that can carry on for like 30 minutes of an actual role play, because the person who's selling needs to know what is he selling, to what company, what does he know about them, what does he know about their needs. There's a lot of background information he needs to have. But also the person who's actually playing the buyer, he needs to react. And when he doesn't know how, he doesn't have the information prepared, one of the tendencies is either to go very, very light on the seller and like agree with everything because you're thinking I'm going to be next, so I want to be nice, or it becomes really, really tough. So it all comes down to this preparation. It really takes a lot of time to do it correctly in the end.
I totally agree. And as I've been present in so many of these simulations, and guys, I just want to tell our audience, and they probably have post-traumas from these things as well. When it burns, it burns. I mean, if you fell off the bike, you're not getting on that bike. Again, you had a bad simulation. And when it's successful, it's such a great experience. And you can't just do it on the fly. You have to be super prepared and you have to be very practical. So I know we said practical, that part will come next, but I want to pull us up for a second. And I want to make sure that we understand the benefits. Yaron mentioned 20 hours. It is an investment. I mean, hands down, it's, you need to sweat it out to build a meticulous kit and be very methodic. So you want to see if it's worth it. And I want to make sure that however you decide, people listening to us, to build a simulations sales program, this is how you will know your program is on the right track. So I want to make sure we understand the strategic benefits and the return on it. Ariel, could you walk us through? We mapped out 9 benefits. And what would you pick to start with? What kind of stands out to you?
Finally, you're allowed to speak.
Finally, I'm allowed to speak. See, I was very patient. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think every one of these actually constitutes as a strategic value to the organization. I'll pick one that we realized over the years that really seems to work well, which is actually the 8th bullet, the one that's titled a bridge. And it goes directly to what you said, Yaron, about the fact that when you just throw people into a room, the entire exercise becomes very tactical and very local. And a lot of opportunities get lost. One of those opportunities is the opportunity to create a very effective synergetic bridge between organizations within the company. For example, you would expect that in most companies, sales organization and the marketing organization would be like the best friends in the world, right? Marketing creates leads, marketing creates, marketing collateral. That's not the case. In company after company that we've been in, we've seen that there's a lot of friction and animosity. And when you talk to the marketing people, they're like, look, we create all of this magnificent sales, customer-facing sales collateral. We even create a sales book for the organization with 200 slides explaining every single demo and market trend and social proof and testimonials by customers, and they never use it. The salespeople say, what do they expect from us? That we're going to sit down and read a 200-page document right now? Kudos for them for sitting in a room and designing. We have to be out selling. One of the things that we did in the design of the simulation kits was to always incorporate into every scenario, into every simulation kit, snippets from the materials that are being made by marketing. And so instead of the salespeople having to take a week off to read all of that material, they only read material that is directly relevant at the time that they're preparing for a role play. And as they accumulate simulation over simulation, they end up gradually consuming this wonderful material that marketing created and gaining a new appreciation. Because what they got was just what they needed at the time that they needed it. And that's when you're going to get the highest level of engagement from people in the field. So that ability to use the simulation program as a bridge across both organizations, we've seen has proven to be very beneficial. That's just one example. Yaron, I'll let you pick one.
Okay, I think actually that leverage your top performers is something that's definitely is worth expanding on, because it actually connects to one of the mistakes as well. Because a lot of the times when we work with many companies, and a lot of the times when they actually do role play, average salespeople and maybe the weaker ones because they need more training. But our top performers, I mean, our stars, I want them out in the field, making money, making sales. I mean, they're doing fine. They don't need this, and maybe they don't need additional training. But on the flip side of that, most of the time when those companies look at their star players or those top salespeople, they have, probably you heard this sort of conversation before where, what this company need? We need another salespeople, like another saleswoman like Valerie. I mean, Valerie, she's great. She can sell anything to anyone. I mean, she's over the chart. She's our best sales woman. And if only we had three more Valeries, I mean, the company would be set. And that's exactly what we want to bring in during the simulation sessions, because we actually take the top performers. We actually incorporate them in constructing the simulation program itself. We would interview them to actually get scenarios from them, to take from their experience, for their knowledge, what worked before, with what type of products, with what type of clients, and actually incorporate all of that into the actual simulation kits themselves, providing a lot of learning for the other people. And when the simulations are actually ready and we start doing role plays, we would always recommend put them the first in front of everybody, put them the first to actually role play. And since everything is remote today, recording the session is very, very easy. And then what you actually have, you have like a demonstration of this is the way it should be done. Like this is the perfect storm, like exactly the way it should be performed. And you have a learning material that you can actually put for the entire sales organization for people to learn from and adopt new ways from that. And that will be actually capturing all that knowledge, all that skill set, and actually keeping it as an asset in the company itself. So if tomorrow those people actually move on to a different company, we retain the knowledge in-house. And that is something that's very, very powerful for the company.
Yeah, I gotta say, I'm a practical gal. So for me, seeing a lot of contents now being transformed to remote as consultants, there's a huge difference if it's just duplicated from face-to-face to remote, or if it's built genuinely for remote, overcoming barriers of different geographies, different culture, time zones. And I gotta say, I mean, this was built for remote, which is a huge benefit to me anyway. So we get why, we get the benefits. Now let's talk about when. Timing is a huge factor. And I know we recommend simulations to go all year long, and we always say be consistent, but sometimes companies don't have that bandwidth and don't have that grace. So if we had to give a checklist, we said let's be, easy breezy cover girl, then what kind of timing advice, or when is it a good time to invest and dedicate and commit to such a program?
Absolutely, Shiraz. So first of all, we would be remiss if we didn't double emphasize the fact that good simulation programs do run all year long, but then we are biased. So I completely agree with you. What we have identified is a common thread that goes through all of the times of year where you may want to put extra effort and attention into building a simulation program. And the one thing that goes in common to all of them is the idea of risk. What is the risk of things going wrong? Here are the 5 things to pay attention to. They're pretty self-explanatory, but they are commonly overlooked. If a company decides to expand into a new market, they're now moving from regular markets to emerging markets, or they're moving from EMEA to APAC or North America. That's going to require practice because that's a new market, new culture, new way of doing things. If a company's adding 1 or 2 offerings to its portfolio, maybe as a result of some breakthrough innovation they came with, or some merger and acquisition process that they completed. If they need to create a new sales process because they've completely shifted the way they're now engaging with their customers, every one of these examples is going to require the sales force to adjust to a new reality. And obviously there isn't any bigger reality than the one we're talking about now, which is having to sell remotely and COVID and the world in crisis and so on. One example that I want to emphasize is the new persona one. More and more companies are understanding, especially companies that are selling enterprise, and especially companies who are trying to sell full portfolios and not just individual products. The larger the deal and the broader the portfolio you're trying to sell, the higher up the buying persona needs to be. When you see salespeople who for years have been accustomed to selling to technical buyers, to people who are in the mid-range management level of the company, 100, 200, 300,000 deal transactions, now the company's trying to sell a $2 million transaction. a more portfolio approach. They have to be able to sell to executives. A lot of salespeople don't feel comfortable with that or don't have the necessary lingo or even executive presence that's required. I don't think we or they want to get them to practice their first times in front of real CEOs and C-suite managers. So for those kind of situations, what you want to do is you want to create a very safe, positive environment where they can not only afford to get things wrong, but where they can afford to experiment with different methods of selling in a very safe environment, but that is still real enough to create real learning. And that's where we go back to the 20-hour per simulation that we said before, which is a whopping number. 20 hours for a single simulation. Yes, because the more robust the simulation kit is, and that's something that we're going to talk about later in the session today, the more people tend to get lost in it in a positive way. Because initially people get very awkward in simulations. It doesn't feel real. What we do is we create a very comprehensive storyline that they can get lost in. And in that storyline, we provide them with everything that they need in order to prepare and engage in what would be a very similar to reality interaction with a very senior executive. So these are the 5 key areas or key timings that you want to make sure you are investing in simulation-based learning.
Right, exactly. And by the way, let's park the whole it's awkward, it's fake motive, because I want to deconstruct that, because again, it goes through a lot of people's minds when they think simulations, and that's why they don't see how can they squeeze that lemon. So we'll get back to that because it's an interesting point. It has to do a lot with the user experience using and practicing simulations.
Absolutely.
But if we talk about the timing, guys, whenever you do it and invest the time in it, Ariel said 20 hours takes time, takes effort, commitment. You want to make sure that you do it right. And when we researched in preparing this webinar, we saw, staggering numbers. We saw, according to the American Society of Training and Development, there is such an entity. American companies spend around $20 billion a year on sales training. Half is spent on sales skill, half is spent on product information, and a large portion is invested in training new sales reps. So guys, we know that you are already pouring money into it, whatever territory you're in. So you want to make sure that you construct it well, and you want to make sure that you invest your money like any other area. It needs to be a smart investment. So let's explore and start, opening this treasure chest and seeing what makes a good simulation program. And let's start by showing you the building blocks. Yaron, can you walk us through it?
Yeah. What you see here is from our simulation kit, or actually the first slide of that. And what we're going to show you here today is actually based on our experience that during the last 6 months alone, actually, we've actually created and delivered simulations for over 1,300 salespeople across the world in companies such as Bloomberg and Nova Measurement Instruments, dear partners. And it's always, delivered and fully executed remotely during COVID. So it's definitely possible. And I want to say, if you can see here, this is the first slide, and this is an orientation slide, kind of what's going on, right, to bring you into it, because it's the first time you're going to see this. So it's get ready for a 30-minute meeting with Roger Winthrop, CDO for Afterlife. The idea of a simulation is we really want to deep dive and boil it down to a very specific point of time. This is the meeting. You are there now, and you have a mission. We'll go over that in a second. But you got there somehow. There's a past. How did you get this meeting? How long did you know Roger Winthrop? What do you know about Mr. Roger Winthrop, the CTO for Afterlife? Is he there for many years or just from yesterday? Is he new to the company? Does he have an agenda? Do you know what that is? And there's a lot of information, that back information, and the company itself that you kind of need to have as well. And that's your 20 hours, okay? What you'll see now on top, by the way, that's a navigation bar with all the chapters of the simulation and what you have in the simulation kit. And that's why it takes so long, because you have to have all of the pieces of information to fill these chapters out. And it has to be done in a very smart way that you'll actually be able to drive a conversation, drive a sales situation. And by the way, this is what we use. Is we do a fully hyperlinked document so people can navigate between each of the points however they want to do it, because we found from our experience from different people consume information in different ways, and they prefer to read the strategic importance, for example, of the situation over the mission goal beforehand or otherwise, and they are free to do that. So there's definitely user experience, like Shiraz said, about kind of designing the way to help you take in all the information, because there's really is a lot in here. If we look at the building blocks that you have on top, by the way, these are all the background information that you need to know. So if we start off, you're going to have your mission. What's happening in this situation? What are you there to do? I'm here to sell something. I'm here to defend my market share, because actually they want to drive me out and take a rival, a different company instead of us. So why am I there in that specific meeting? There's I will show you in a moment an overview. Simulation characteristics shows kind of an overview of the interaction. We'll show it in a bit. Data about the specific firm, will show you that as well. What do we know about them? How long have we been in business together? What is their market? What are they using us for if they have in the past before? What is the relation? How do they stand and all of that? And there's additional information. What you can see, by the way, on the very right side, when you can see Vayomar methodology, that, for example, in this specific case, we actually teach or give in part of the simulation. We actually give a methodology from Vayomar. This is a tool that you can actually use. So the simulation kit will give you all the background, and also will tell you, okay, so this is what you need to do. There's a tool here that you can use, and here is kind of tips of how you can use that during this session. So
Yaron, I would jump in here, and I think that a really important point in what we're showing here is that we're not just looking at the design and structure of a simulation kit through the perspective of what do they need in order to successfully prepare and get through the role play. The kit becomes a role model for the salespeople. A lot of times salespeople look at this kit, and one of the things they say is, why didn't I have this for my meeting, for my real meeting last week? So don't get us wrong. Some salespeople prepare more than others. Some are extremely thorough. But at the end of the day, what we are trying to show them is there is a systematic, structured approach to showing up to a customer meeting ready. And that approach includes a certain amount of content collection and intelligence gathering and preparation. And we are showing you what that looks like through the simulation while we are practicing with you its application and having you learn best practices. And I think that's a very important part that goes back to, Yaron, what you were talking about earlier when we talked about common mistakes. No, a simulation and a role play are not just let's get two people in a room. It is so much more than that.
I just want to chime in here for a sec, Ariel, because you pushed a button personally. And I think the value here is twofold. Because number one, personally, when I see salespeople, and let's talk a second about their DNA. Salespeople are like rock stars. You know, they are used to winging it and to improvise. Their talents, they're good at relationships, they're charismatic, and they think that's what got them so far. That's why they don't need to work methodically until they do. And then they understand the benefits of actually studying the customer and covering all their blind spots. So it's amazing to see that switch from working intuitively, from people who are good and relied on their gut for a long time, to topping it all up with being more methodic and actually working on this kit. It's a really cool transformation. That's number one. And what I like to see, the benefit for you managers, whether it's, you're managing the division as sales or even learning and development, you did not set your people up for a fall. There's nothing worse than someone who says, okay, just like we said, action, you play this, you play that, and let's make this awkward and awful for everybody together. You cannot set your people up for a fall. And once you give them that kit, you actually enable them to, first of all, get through the simulation right and have it not be an awkward experience. And second, shine with the customer. And if you saw all our ads and promos leading up to today, we used a lot of sports images. And it's not just for the sakes of marketing and graphics, although it looks nice. It really does simulate that situation, because think about it. If you won the gold medal and if you're a star athlete, you're probably pretty good at what you do, and still you have a battery of coaches and you train every day. And if you want to win systematically, if you want to stay on top, or even just realize what went good or what went wrong, it has to be constructed.
Shiraz, I see we have a question from Ifat about how does this come to play with account planning. So Ifat, it's very, very interesting. A lot of times we've come across multiple interpretations of the idea of account planning, from something that you only do once you're in the account for the purpose of retention, landing and expanding and so on, versus people who actually see account planning as a pre-close deal process. I think if we move on, Ifat, to the next slide, you'll see that it has a lot to do with account planning, because every opportunity needs to be mapped according to every one of these components. And what we're going to show you now is how to actually educate your salespeople about what is the kind of information they need to be looking for. And almost like every account they're working on needs to have the potential of becoming a simulation kit for further learning that never stops growing. So we have an issue, we have a chapter that says about your persona, about the buyer. Well, sometimes you're going to have 5 buyers. Sometimes you're going to start with 1 and you're going to expand in your account. When we talk about account planning, we talk about what is the context, what is the organizational structure of this account? Have they gone through any major transformational changes, and so on and so forth. So in a lot of respects, your question is very valid. There's a lot here that has to do with account planning, but there's also a lot of components in account planning that don't go into the simulation-based program. For example, account planning will very much include looking at organizational structure and so on and so forth. That's not necessarily the level of detail we will go into in a simulation, precisely because of a very important point that Shiraz raised before. A scenario, a role-playing scenario, has to represent a very specific moment in time. One of the things that we've seen is that when you don't tell them it's Tuesday morning, it's your 3rd meeting, you have an hour with them, you haven't spoken to them for 2 weeks, but unless we narrow it down, it becomes very, very difficult to articulate a clear mission for the simulation. When you know exactly what point in time you are, you can create a mission. And if you think about it, that is very close to reality. Because anytime a customer is being faced by one of your salespeople, they have to endure and succeed in that interaction, which is very, very localized. So Ifat, I hope that answers your question. And if not, we can dive into it a little bit later after the break. Johan, how about we actually walk in and maybe share a few of the actual chapters themselves?
Okay, before we move in, actually, just to touch a last point regarding the account planning, is actually the point that you can see here that's called strategic importance. Because one of the things that we actually do when creating the simulation, and like we said before, we actually do this with the salespeople themselves or with the sales team. So we interview them. Usually it's based on real accounts. And what we ask them, okay, so that's the opportunity for the scenario. Wonderful. Why is it important for the company? Why is it important other than just closing this specific deal? What's the strategic importance of this? And that starts their thinking already in the building phase of, oh, maybe I didn't think about this. Maybe this is actually a wrong use case. Maybe it's not important enough. So what we actually created goes to what Ariel said before, that at the end, when you have this kit, and it kind of starts to, if people do this many times and they say to themselves, I need to have all this information, they start to think, okay, what's the strategic importance of this specific opportunity, and why do I really want to pursue it, and prioritize that over a different opportunity I might have. So that really goes into more account planning and even pipeline prioritizations as well. But let's move on into the actual kind of how it looks like, into the specific chapters. So all of these, this is, for example, how you can see in the nav bar, the little highlight in blue, that's kind of the second station on the way. This is how a legend would look like. It gives you like a snapshot of what's going on. Each company have a different one. We're selling to different industries. Who are we selling to? What is the level of the buying persona? Are we selling to an IT or to a C-level? What's going on here? What's the type of company we're selling to? and also what part in the sales cycle we are at, right? Are we in the introduction level or are we at renewal? So that gives you kind of a snapshot really to evaluate what's going on and what is this opportunity really all about and how does it look like. So
now,
really
I'll jump in, Yaron. This is a very important component for a company because you're not going to set up a simulation program just for the purpose of creating 2 or 3 case studies. The idea is to create a library of case studies that grows organically. Now, when you have a large library of scenarios, you also want to make sure that collectively they cover the arc of situations that your company is dealing with. But also in the short term, you want to emphasize the simulations that address the key weaknesses the company is in today. Every company has its own sales cycle. Every company has its own sales funnel. And when companies analyze their portfolio of opportunities, it is not uncommon for them to realize that their funnel is uneven. Maybe they're really great at creating opportunities, but they're stuck in the middle at conversions. Maybe they're good at conversions, but they're not getting enough top of funnel opportunities. Maybe they're going through the funnel, but they're not getting renewals. And remember, the idea is to start with closing a new customer and then advance the relationship with them to a point where they are actually advocating for your company. That's when you establish leadership in the market. And so we use this legend also as a navigational map with which we determine the composition of scenarios that will ultimately be developed for the company, exactly based on their needs and based on the arc of the opportunity. And then we display it to the salespeople as a bird's eye view of, look, all the situations you're ever going to deal with are going to come down to this legend. And that's a very important mapping exercise.
And I think a continuation of that is also about the entire idea of building internal capabilities. Because when we go to companies and we help them to set up this simulation program, we usually there for a short period of time. Not that short, like we told you, it takes time. But we are there for a certain set of simulations. This is what we bring we teach several methodologies. We build a simulation center, and we help them actually have the tools to do this without us. So they can continue on and build continuous simulations without us. And actually, this specifically is a tool that can help them as a capability tool, say, what are we looking for to actually bring in more scenarios and actually build more simulations ourselves?
Right. The idea is for it to become a second nature for the company and to start working, for this to be their modus operandi, to work methodically and for this to be the infrastructure and to become second nature. So guys, if we say, it's a big investment, yes, but as you implement it into your organization and it starts being kind of the way you operate, then the whole point of it is to be more natural.
This cool. Is a very important point, Shiraz, because in order for these kind of programs to be alive, the scenarios need to get updated all the time. Because the company is constantly evolving. The market is evolving. If companies had to constantly hire partners like ourselves every single year to do this, that would hinder the sustainability of the program. So one of the things that we do, exactly based on your point, is we create incremental levels of difficulty in the program. So every program has the initial components of several webinars where they're taught methodologies, simulation building process, role playing, drop-in sessions for clarifications, and sometimes one-on-one consulting. As the level of the simulations go up, one of the levels is having the salespeople build the simulations themselves. Mm-hmm. So now you're not just serving them a library of simulations and having them practice something somebody else designed for them. You are actually using them to constantly cultivate new scenarios. So it's a fully distributed, therefore very low cost and very diverse finger to the pulse of the market kind of approach that allows you to constantly develop your library of scenarios while maintaining a high level of engagement with your salespeople, which in itself is not a small feat. So, why don't we continue looking at one more example here is, another example is information we give about the firm. I don't think we're going to go through all of the chapters. I think what we want to do now is maybe talk a little bit about why does it take so long? Why do you really need to spend so many hours building a simulation? Is there a way of maybe doing it much, much faster? Here, maybe we walk through some of the stages of the program as far as how we develop it and bring it into the company.
Yeah, no, definitely. We want to cut corners. If it'd be faster, it'd be good for everybody. In the same amount of time, we can make just more simulations and actually create more value. But this is kind of the work process. In order to get those actual scenarios, things that will actually talk to the salespeople when they're role playing, and not some, fake something out of the blue, but something that would sound real and actually have all the details. We need to conduct client interviews. We actually talk to those top salespeople, like we said before, actually getting and harvesting from them all the information regarding the actual background and the opportunity itself, and also a lot of the context, the strategic importance, and things that they've done. Because a lot of the time they say, listen, this is what I did in that opportunity and it worked. And we can actually incorporate that as learning as well. So we take all of that and then we actually go by and develop the simulation ourselves. We kind of construct the entire kit with all the chapters that you've seen, and that takes a lot of time. On one hand, we get a lot of information, and it would be very easy to just pour it on the salespeople, but we don't want to create a simulation kit that is 50 slides long. We really have to condense it in a way that on the one hand would create enough information and enough availability for them to go and say, okay, I can work off of this. But on the other hand, they won't say, oh my God, I'm not going to read this much. So we have to find the correct balance. And also we want to find the correct approach, the methodological approach, so we can actually connect to that as well and bring some Vayomar tools into the methodology as well. When that is done and we have like the initial draft, we actually conduct a trial run. This is like a beta phase. What we want to achieve here is actually take someone who was not involved in the process before, just giving him a simulation kit and say, okay, you're the seller. This is everything you have to work from is in this deck. Let's see if it runs. And we do a dry run of the simulation and we want to see, does it work? Did they have enough information? Is there anything missing? Was there enough engagement? Maybe they go, it surprises and went somewhere else and we can learn. We use also, the sales teams are also involved in the dry runs. So we collect all the information from everybody, all the comments, take it back, revise everything if we need. And then only then we can actually finalize it and say, okay, this is ready. We can actually launch it into the program. It goes live. And in that moment in time for us, any two people in the company can just pick up a deck. One is the buyer, one is the seller, and they should be ready to go. Okay. So that's why it takes a lot of time. It's slow, but we really want to make sure that it's on the money. And after the role play is done, actually, what we found is there's actually a lot of value that we can actually deduct after it's done, right? So Ariel, maybe you want to take us over ability
Absolutely.
to measure?
Sure thing. We're going to talk about measuring. We'll talk a little bit about the post-simulation discussions that happen. When you look at these 4 steps that we just gave you, and those steps can take several weeks per simulation. If you think about it, you're looking at something that resembles a product development process. And you might ask yourself, okay, are they overdoing it? Are they exaggerating? Maybe they're just, completely OCD about the whole thing. The thing is, the level of investment and attention to detail and quality assurance testing required to create a good simulation-based program goes in parallel to the level of complexity and the rising bar of difficulty that goes with sales. Selling a product today, a software as a service offering to a large international enterprise, is not what selling was 50 years ago. And as the world became more complex, the level of difficulty became higher. To Shiraz's point about the gold medal, Olympic athletes today are competing for fractions of seconds in order to get that medal. So I don't want you to be overwhelmed by this robust approach. This robust approach can actually be worth a lot of money if you're creating even marginal improvements across an average of your sales force. It's worth it. And your salespeople will respond accordingly. So to your point, Yaron, at the end of every simulation, we conduct several things. One thing that we do is we have a discussion. We advise that the simulation should never end with the role play, but that an equal amount of time, about 20 minutes to half an hour for the role play, and another roughly 20 minutes to half an hour of discussion. That discussion can be between the person playing the buyer and the person playing the seller, but it can also be done in a concept called pods. For example, one of the companies we're working with now, we're dealing with hundreds of salespeople. What they did was they divided themselves into pods of 10, and every pod has a person role playing the customer and the seller. And then the remaining people listen, observe, fill in a scorecard that's meant to create a data-driven evaluation of the process, and have a discussion. It's amazing to see how much learning takes place in the post-role play discussion. That's where we'll ask the people in the room, we'll start with the person who was the seller, who say, so how did that go for you? What do you think you did great? What do you think you could improve? Then we go to the buyer. How did it feel to be in the seats of the client? You know, salespeople say, I never quite saw reality through the eyes of the client until I actually role played one. And this is what I realized. I didn't know that it looks like this from that end. This is what I liked. This is what rubbed me the wrong way. And then we open it up to the rest of the room, and we recommend that a sales executive in the room to oversee. Shiraz, I see that the ambulance that just passed me is now passing you or somebody next to us, small country. Now, after that is done and people share their insights, and we have a conversation that also allows room for peer-to-peer learning, because people will use this opportunity to say, hey, here's how I would have done it. Actually, I had a case study like that happen to me 2 months ago. Here's how I dealt with it, or something to that effect. Finalize with an insights and takeaways conversation. Now, what you're seeing here is an example of one screen out of multiple screens of an analog scorecard. You also might want to consider having a digital scorecard. We offer both to our customers based on the preference that they have. And you may notice that every scorecard also is asking to get some feedback about what is called the Vayomar methodologies. Now, if you want to build a program like this, you don't have to work with Vayomar. You can work with anybody. You can create your own simulations. Anybody that you work with that has methodologies, this would be where you want to put those methodologies in. When the salespeople understand that they're being evaluated for the methodologies at the core of the simulation, they prepare. And every simulation kit has a brief segment about the methodologies that is an additional layer of learning that follows the webinars where those methodologies were introduced. And finally, we can create reports for you where you can take a look at what happened in the first round, what happened in the second round. A lot of times we like to correlate the information from multiple sources. What did the person think about themselves? What did the person playing the buyer think? What did the people in the room think? What did the sales executive think? All of that information is gathered to allow for a highly personalized evaluation of every single person who participated, but also it allows for a more meta-analysis of your organization where we can find trends that go across the organization. Now, why is this so important? You know, before COVID, when did you see a lot of role-playing or discussions or training sessions? You saw them in sales kickoffs. We know we've done more than I can remember, right? And what happens when you look at sales kickoff events, you have the general assembly session, and then you have breakouts. Almost always, what dictates the structure of a breakout is either regional or product line. Both of these are not looking at the salespeople at enough of a granular level. You're always clustered into a group based either on geography or product line. I wouldn't throw that away. That's important. But what if you knew that out of 1,000 salespeople in your organization, or out of 50 salespeople in your organization, 4 of them have scored weekly around the same concept, around the same personality trait, or around any one of the methodologies? Now you can actually create a training session for those 4 people, regardless of where they are in the world. And that goes back to what Yaron said before about it being remote, one of the 9 strategic benefits. When you start personalizing the attention that you give your salespeople, you can expect to see dramatic increases in their engagement. it's true that salespeople don't always love being trained. They don't like being pulled away from their work. But at the end of the day, when you give them something that they can see will create good earnings for them, they're more likely to respond. And that's why making sure that every program, you use whatever method that you want, but make sure it's data-driven. Make sure that you're evaluating it. It will get them to take it more seriously, and it will give you the opportunity to see your organization like through an X-ray machine. And that's a very valuable process. Back to you, Shiraz.
Right, just a quick observation about what you said, the conversation after a feedback, having seen and delivered a few of those. So guys, it's not for the sake of, empathy or, any kind of psychological or emotional component. It actually is in line with, technological development methods like Agile or Lean startups, where after every iteration, you want to get a feedback from your customer. And guys, employees today and talents, salespeople are just like customers, and they can ditch you or they can excel and they can be a true asset. So even the feedback or the retrospective conversation is a constructed, methodic component of the program, and we have to understand the rationale behind it. So it's not just a holding hands kind of conversation. It has a lot of intel and it has a lot of value. And I want to go back, Ariel and Yaron, to the whole measurement thing. Why is it important to understand that we have invested so much or done and committed ourselves to a certain channel and then see the impact, measure it, then what do we do with it? Okay, we got a snapshot. Then what's the second leg?
What's the second leg, sorry, Shiraz, of?
After we measure and we understand, how do we take it forward in terms of being personalized? How can we actually make sure everyone advances on their own axis? We have those numbers, we have the analytics.
Right, so it really depends on the trends that we find. If we find that there is a critical mass of people who have scored weakly, what you're seeing now is just one report out of multiple reports that can be created. This specific report deals with what we call attributes, right? And that relates more to the personal characteristics of the salesperson. But there are also additional reports that relate to how well they were able to implement the simulation pertaining to every one of the chapters in the kit. After we collect that information and we aggregate it, we look for trends. If we find that there's a large enough trend across the company pertaining to a specific weakness, we recommend conducting some kind of online training for that population. However, in most cases, you're going to see a pretty even distribution across the organization where you had people who like 5 or 10% needed help here, 5 or 10% needed help there. What you want to do is you want to map out those cohorts and you want to create a almost like breakout session format of training where people can opt in. So you can send out an email to the people who are weak in a certain area and say, we've constructed a webinar for you just on that. And for the other group, we've done that. Another thing you can do, which goes back to leveraging the top talent in your organization, is you're going to find people on polar ends of the spectrum. You're going to find people who are very, very good at an area where other people in the organization were really, really underperforming. Put them together. Let them learn from one another. Let the people who are weak in one thing see and attend a simulation that's being done by somebody that was good. And what you are now creating is a self-sufficiency in the organization that is looking at all of your salespeople as one big whole that's worth more than the sum of its pieces, and not just a collection of individuals who each have to meet a quota. And that's a very, very valuable thing that kind of gels your sales organization together. I don't see another way of doing that without being really, really data-driven. So last but not least, let's talk a little bit about what should be the components of any sales simulation program that you might build. Number one, and I think we've covered this thoroughly, practice, make sure you're simulating real cases. Don't sit in a room as a member of a learning management organization and conjure up ideas. Talk to your field, conduct comprehensive win-lose analysis discussions around what are the deals that we won? What are the deals that we lost? Why? That's going to create a library of opportunities for you around what we call your world focus. 2, make sure to incorporate peer-to-peer learning. 3, make sure you have methodologies that can supplement your salespeople. Here it says Vayomar methodologies. You can substitute that with any methodology that you've tried and tested and feel comfortable with. And finally, make sure that anything that you're building is not just built for a one-time use and then gets discarded. You actually want to make sure that all the hours that you are putting in are going to have a recurring value for you quarter over quarter, year over year. Now, Shiraz, we have on our call today one of our lovely customers who's actually one of the companies, Yaron, that you mentioned before. You might want to unmute yourself. Tami, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
So let me briefly introduce you. Tami Yosef is HR director for Nova Measurement Instruments. We've known each other and we've been working together for well over 2 years. And we've been working with you this year. We had a very interesting development with you. We were going to do the sales kickoff for you, 2nd year in a row in Bangkok.
Right. One minute before the corona, right?
I remember the call from you saying, listen, we're just going to delay it to May.
Right. And then to July and then to,
So, Tami, tell us a little bit about your experience. Tell us a little bit about how this ended up evolving into really what's becoming a full-blown simulation-based program for your company.
So just following our last 2 days calls, I just would add to your must-have components something to do with what is your management, or I don't know, in each company it's a little different, but I think I found out even just in the last few days how important it is that the whole simulation process will be done very closely with the expectations of the, I don't know if it's the management, if it's the sales executive, if it's the CEO. In each company it's a little different, because in our case we just found out how important it is that the mission that we are defining for each simulation, or the mission for the whole process, is very much aligned with the company. I'm not even sure it's the company, but it's the person that is in charge of everything. In my case, it's the CBO, the Chief Business Officer, is the head of the sales. And the way that he sees it and the mission that he sees, it's not always the mission that the people that write the simulation, it's not always the same mission. And if it's something that you find out late in the process, like we had just this week, live from our days. So I think if I can give one important tip on this, so this would be my first, to keep the people that are the decision making, the people that are managing the whole team, very much aligned and very much close with the simulations writing, because when you see the gap, it does two things. It's, first of all, it's a good thing to discover the gap, because then you see that the people that writing the simulations are maybe far from what we want them to be. So it's a good thing to find it out in the right time and fix it. But in parallel, you need to see that you don't work on too much simulations, and there's a lot of time invested on this, and then you find out there are gaps after you build something, and it can frustrate people, it can cause the big gap. But I jumped to something, and I just want to start maybe, and Ariel, please let me know what kind of inputs you want from my side, but I can say two things. First of all, in general, I was someone that I actually, Ariel and the team are our team that I'm just flying with, okay? I'm always coming with the little concerns, but they have my full trust, and I'm just flying with them. It happens last year SKO, this year planned SKO, and this time with the simulations, I usually just give myself and fly with their dreams and with their suggestions, and I'm not disappointed, so I'm still going with that. So I just started with the simulation believing it will work, And we are now in the situation where we started to build the simulations, the sales managers. We have like 15 sales managers who are writing their own simulations, and they're in a process of working on it with the Vayomar team. But now, but I think that first of all, in general, it's something that is it's like you going somewhere and you don't know where it takes you. This is my my experience. Like comparing to other training sessions and workshops and all kind of learning methods that you have, in the simulation method, you just start and you don't know where it will get you. Because when people are involved and when people writing the simulation, people brings their flavor, you don't know where it will go.
I remember Tommy, when we talked at the beginning of the process, like, so how many simulations do we want to build? Let's build 15, let's build 20. And I think we talked about the fact that why don't we build 5? Let's build 3. Let's practice. Let's see what happens. It's very, very important that this become a very, very highly iterative process. So I just want to be very, very cognizant of time before we continue. We had promised you a 1-hour format that would then be followed by half an hour of Q&A. So you're welcome to stay and add your questions into the chat or chime up. We'll be happy to answer. One question that I want to ask you, Tommy, is what was one of the most, we're still in the midst of rolling this out with you.
Right.
Already where we are now, give me an example of one positive outcome that you can already say, I'm seeing this happen. This is, to me already, I know this was worth doing.
So the first and maybe the most, I don't know, strong outcome that I'm taking, it's what I said before, is understanding. It's like, you know, I don't know how to say it in English. It's like everything dropped to you and you understand where your sales managers are comparing to where you want them to be. Because when you ask them first time to sit down and to write a simulation that is a challenge to them and to write the mission, and the head of the sales says, guys, this is not the mission. This is not what I want from you. So it's like in 1 minute, I felt like, you know, something got out from the skies and showed me very clearly where are the gaps of the people. It showed him what is the gaps of the people. Like it wasn't 5 minutes because we worked a lot, but there was no other way we could like drop it and understand how he sees them and how they see their mission and their role. And if you ask me for one outcome, it doesn't sound positive maybe for a second, but for me, it is positive.
No, we definitely, we wrote, if you look at the slide with the 9 strategic benefits, one of the bullets we put there was X-ray vision, right?
Exactly.
A good simulation program will uncover a lot of gaps, which, by the way, sometimes is a reason why organizations don't want it. Meaning you have to be ready to really take a very honest look at your organization. You have to be ready to deal with some underlying currents that until now we're kind of there, didn't require any political friction. We're costing the organization money and opportunity, but actually allowed things to kind of stay relaxed. Suddenly, you're creating an opportunity for friction. And in the short term, that friction can be challenging, but it's very, very healthy. Now, I'm seeing a question from Tapan, how this simulation can help low-level management in selling more. Shiraz, this sounds to me like maybe you can share with us a little bit about the whole concept of from intuition to methodology, because I think this is a classic aspect of that question.
Right. So first of all, Tapan, it's a great comment because we always think, wait a minute, the sales professionals who are from this tier or that tier, this actually crosses all levels. And as soon as they're on board, this is the tempo you want them in. So you want them in this kind of mode. So in terms of flipping from intuition to methodology, basically when they get this kit and they get all the information, They understand that they need to study the customer, understand, cover all the blind spots, go through each and every stage until they actually get to the simulation. They covered all this background. So it actually crosses different levels. It can be, you know, junior level, senior level, and it's actually agnostic to the level of sales that you're in. Of course, it has to be adjusted to the context entirely. And I
Right.
just want to say one more thing for everyone, because everything is so different. And I see things, you know, as a very, we have to compensate for a field that's been very much neglected. And it could be, you know, low-level management or senior-level management. Sales and sales simulations or training has been neglected because we kind of let them run, right? And we trust it to be okay. But the whole point is, as early on as you can, to switch from intuition to being more methodic and not keep it, you know, this such critical lifeline so neglected.
And Shiraz, you mentioned this before, the importance of getting it right the first time versus getting it wrong. People are more likely to want to engage in something where they can experience success. If you look at gamification dynamics, almost any app that has leveling up capabilities, the first few layers, you immediately level up. You download an application, you start the game, you play one game, up, you're level 2. You play 3 games, up, you're level 3. What the gaming industry has learned is that giving you positive reinforcement early in the game will get you to the endurance required for the later layers. So Tapan, for your question, number one, it can help lower level, exactly to Shiraz's point, by helping them early in their career shift to a methodological approach to sales that doesn't rely on intuition. Number two, when you're building simulations for lower level sales, make sure you're building them to be simple and able to succeed and build confidence. Number three, you have an amazing opportunity with entry-level salespeople because you can prime their entire approach. The earlier they are in their career, the less resistant they're going to be. So if they're learning early on in your company that it's important to simulate, they will. When they learn that it's important to collect information from clients, they will. When you give them early in their career good methodologies about persuasion and account planning and so on, think about the earlier on in their career, the greater the return on investment along their career, which by the way is more likely to be with you because you really gave them the tools that they needed. So that I think is our answer to your question. Tapan, I hope that addresses what you were meaning to ask. Wonderful. Before I go back to Tommy and continue drilling her, any other questions, anything else you'd like us to double down on?
I just want to share actually just one point because you talked about gamification and immersion. And I think that what we've seen when we have those very robust kits, that people get very immersed in the role play. So actually, we've just been running a couple of simulations the last 2 weeks, like 4 a day with a certain organization. And what we've actually been seeing that although they have like 30 minutes, they were not able to stop when the time ended if they didn't reach the goal. I mean, they had a mission. You have to get the buyer to say, okay, I'll agree for a meeting with my boss next week. And if they couldn't get there, they just would not go away. They said, no, 1 more minute. No, I'm almost there. I really want to try it. So I think that the immersion, that actually it's kind of a gamification. If the kid is good enough, you really get that immersion in, and that's really what gets a lot of results and funny moments as well during the process.
Which of course is the exact opposite of very basic simulations where you say to people simulate and they look around and like, what do you mean simulate? I'm in my office. Like, this isn't real. I can't take this seriously. I'm not going to learn anything from this because this is just so disconnected from my reality. There's a concept called suspended disbelief, and it's applied to storytelling. When we watch a movie and it's a fantastic movie, we forgive inconsistencies in the storyline because we're willing to suspend disbelief in order to immerse in the movie. A simulation kit should be a story. It should be a story that your salespeople can get lost in. And if you build it well and you throw them into the story quickly enough, they apply suspended disbelief and they dive in. And that's where we see that, we get on camera with them and we say, 3 minutes, they're like, no, wait, we're not done. And they really want to keep going at it. And the same thing happens with the post-simulation discussions, where they gain so much value from the conversation they're getting with their peers that they're like, well, I need more of this. Why didn't I get this last week? And that's very, very important. Tommy, I want to go back to you for just a minute, and I want to talk a little bit about how you find the challenge of you operate in different regions. And you operate in a very, very, very specialized industry. So for those of you who may not be aware, though it's highly unlikely, Nova Measurement Instruments is a key company in the field of semiconductors, providing the necessary measurements for what makes this possible. And if you want to know why you have longer battery life, a lot of it has to do with the technology tools that Nova has created to allow for measurement at the nano environments. But you have salespeople working in Asia, across different countries. You then have North America, you have Europe. It's, you know, how have you found the challenge of dealing with so many different regions and so many different cultures under one umbrella? And how are you seeing the simulation program address that?
So since we didn't start performing the simulations yet, we're just building them now. Maybe I could answer better, you know, in a couple of months. But I would say, first of all, that yes, you're right. The Israelis were much more open and cooperative with the whole concept of simulations. The Asians, sales managers were a lot much more suspicious, and it took a long time to get them to write the simulation. And I think Yaron can also, Guy, Justin can also say now what kind of things they're meeting when they meet the Asians. I think it's less common for them to do it. Again, just in the last week, we decided that the head of the sales will perform the first simulation in front of everybody. It was our last minute decision, and I'm happy that we're going to do it, because I think that this will be a great mentoring, a great opportunity to show them what are the expectations. And yes, it is more challenging for different regions to go with it. Personally, since I have a few regions and few cultures that I'm leading, so I always try to tailor made. So I must say that if in the end of the day, I don't know, someone will say, guys, this is too much for me. Please, I don't want to record it. I don't want to do it that way or this way. I will tailor made, because this is my belief in life that not everybody needs to be the same. But in general, yes, I think that Israelis are much more open to the simulation methodology, and Asia specifically much less. But again, my approach is to push, and each one will take it to where he wants to take it.
And you bring a point that's really, really interesting. You know, a lot of companies, when we went into COVID, were seeing only bad news.
Right.
I remember the conversation we had about the incredible opportunity that we now have, where a 4-day SKO in Bangkok, which I would have loved to do,
of course, all of us,
now turned from a 4-day, once-a-year opportunity into a year-long opportunity. And to your point about personalization, once you have these kits, you just need 2 people on a video conferencing call to simulate. And you can start doing this all year long, and you can start cross-referencing people, and you no longer have the overhead involved in the logistical costs and planning of getting so many people from around the world into one room. And you can start cross-pollinating across regions and product lines, because you have the flexibility of remote work. Right. And to me, I think if any company is looking now to really, really make the most out of COVID, this is not just about bouncing back. This is about bouncing forward. This is about taking everything that COVID created, which is an accelerated process of working remotely, and now turning it into one of the greatest learning opportunities for an organization. And that really is a great opportunity. Shiraz, I'm going to hand it back to you. I don't see any more questions in the chat, so maybe we'll summarize. Tommy, I want to thank you very much for attending the session today and for sharing from your experience, really.
Good luck. Good luck, everybody.
Great, guys. So time flies, right, when we're having this much fun. So evidently this is the end of our hour and a half. But if still someone wants to ask something, didn't get a chance to, or wants to talk to us, of course, feel free to contact. We can send you a recording, and also the first segment, the webinar, the entire program, we can also send you that link. And as you guys were speaking, for some reason, this image popped. You know how news anchors and people on TV, for them to look natural, they have to put on so much makeup beforehand. And if you want to look natural, sometimes you really have to sweat it out. And just like athletes, for them to be able to shoot the hoop at the right moment, there's hours of practice behind it. And it takes investment. And again, sales and training and simulations, it seems like something that should be just authentic, and you just have to do it right now. And authentic is overrated. You want a good learning experience, and that takes method and takes being meticulous, and you have to sweat it out. So it's not about being authentic, it's about learning something and having an impact and doing it right. And there's a great reason, there's 9 great reasons, the benefits that we shared. So again, we'll be happy to hear from you. This was our pleasure, actually, to have this conversation, to have an audience listening in and commenting. So thank you so much for joining. And I guess we'll see you next time, right?
Absolutely. Shiraz, thank you so much. Yaron, thank you. It's a pleasure. We will be in touch with all of you either in our newsletter or when we are ready to launch the next webinar. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.